It's day 23 of the Karen Read trial. I'm going to give you my daily recap. I went to the Hall of Fame induction for Tom Brady at Gillette Stadium and I stayed out way too late. Wasn't able to film my recap yesterday, but I'm up early today. There's a full day of court today as well, but I wanted to get my recap filmed. There's nothing better than that first sip of coffee. But today we have Michael Proctor back on the stand. He is in the middle of his cross-examination from Alan Jackson. We still have a lot of cross-examination to get through. He's on the stand for a while. The texts are bad. The texts are very damning. There's 3 hours of you're saying these horrible things and you're supposed to be the case officer, and it does not look good. So we saw on Monday that Lally was able to get ahead of it and introduce the text messages, but it really doesn't soften the blow because Alan Jackson is so theatrical. He starts off with, there are 8 other people in this group text with Michael Proctor. They are friends of his from high school. These are your closest friends, and he is spilling the tea. This text message chain is happening just a few hours after John O'Keefe is found. So on January 29th at 10:52 p.m., he goes by Chip. I guess that's his nickname with his friends. He also has a nickname Bear, I guess. But he told them the victim's name at 10:53 p.m. in a text message. One of his friends says, "Wow, I'm sure the owners of the house will receive some shit." And Michael Proctor writes back, "Nope, he's a Boston cop too." So Alan Jackson hammers it in and he says, okay, 16 hours into this investigation, you already knew that the homeowner was a Boston police officer and you weren't going to be investigating him. At this point in the investigation, we have to remember he has only talked to Jen McCabe, Matt McCabe, and he talked to Brian Albert. So they weren't going to be looking into Brian Albert at all. And he establishes that from the very beginning. He is reluctant to give up the homeowner's name to his friend's group text. His friends asked twice. He ignores that text completely. And there's a lot of confusion in the chat. Like the friends think that the woman cop lived at the house, but finally he establishes, no, it was his girlfriend. She waffled him. I looked at his body at the hospital. And we do see like he totally is like desensitized to murder and crime. He is obviously a state trooper. He sees this all the time. So his friend asks, I thought he was drunk. Did he get beat up? So here we are the night of the investigation beginning and his friend is asking, did he get beat up? Because this is what it sounds like to him too. The friends really are confused. They said something smells funny, like they know that this is not right. So Alan Jackson is asking, you initially thought that you had a death from a physical altercation. You saw his body at the hospital. They go through all of the injuries. Have you ever seen a pedestrian struck by a vehicle with no bruising from the neck down? And that's how John O'Keefe was at the hospital. He had no broken bones, to his knowledge, below the neck down. And he essentially, we get to the answer, he says no. We get into more of the rude name calling with the group of friends. His friends want to know, is she hot at least? And he said, she's a whack job, CUNT. 0 chance she skates, meaning, a friend says 0 chance she skates. And then he says, I'm going to make sure she doesn't. She's effed. So overall, it really sounds like he's a police officer. The homeowner is a Boston police officer. The victim is a Boston police officer. They're going to protect each other as a unit. And this woman, Karen Read, is going to take the brunt of it. She's taking everything. 0 chance she skates. We're pinning it all on her, essentially. And this was established 16 hours into the investigation. In his questioning by Mr. Lally, he had very eloquent answers saying that he follows the investigation where the evidence takes him, but it really looks like he already had his mind made up and then he went and collected the evidence to support that theory after the fact. I'll get to this text message here, but there's a lot of communication between Michael and his sister Courtney that is admitted, and basically we're establishing the relationship between Courtney Proctor, his sister, and Julie Albert. There's a lot here. So Julie Albert was inquiring to babysit Michael's Proctor's children. Sometimes she babysat other people's children. And we learned that Julie and Chris were interviewed at 5:30 p.m. on February 10th. One of the text messages from his sister says, how did it go with Julie? Basically saying about the interview. And she says she was nervous. And Michael Proctor says, haha, why? It was good, not too long. And he's essentially reporting on the details of the interview that he had with one of the people that was at the location where John O'Keefe died, to his sister. He told his sister that it's a homicide, don't say a word to anyone. She says back, I would never mess with that. Alan Jackson wants to establish that, yeah, I would never mess with that because these are the Alberts. You don't want any part of messing with that. One of the text messages very early on January 30th at 9:13 a.m. from Courtney says, Jesus Christ, the party was at one of the Alberts. We then get into the text about the bribe here where Courtney says that Julie wants to get you a gift at the end of this, and Michael Proctor says, no, don't get anything for me, just get it for my wife. And that sounds like a bribe to me. We learned that Colin Albert's name was not disclosed in any police reports until July 18th, 2023. That's like a year and a half into the investigation. Even though he left the residence, they're all on the same timeline. They have all said the same time, which sounds very rehearsed, 12:10 a.m. Alan Jackson wants to know, did you make any effort to keep Colin Albert's name out of the investigation? He says no. But he does say he didn't investigate Colin Albert because he wasn't there at the home when everyone else was there. But we know that's not right because Nicole Albert and Brian Albert say that they saw Colin Albert leaving the house when they arrived. The Canton Police Department was recused from the investigation. They're not supposed to be doing anything. They're not supposed to be questioning anyone. We learned that Michael Proctor texted a Canton police officer asking about surveillance cameras in the area of Canton High School. He got two cameras that officer recommended, but they never pulled footage from these areas. So that's a little suspicious. Was there something on those cameras? Alan Jackson starts rattling off names of everybody involved with the investigation, the Albert family, the McCabe family, and aside from just a handful of people, most people were not interviewed at all until 16 to 23 months into the investigation. We start getting into the text messages that Brian Higgins extracted from his personal cell phone and turned into Mass State Police. He says he never asked Brian Higgins for his phone, but the text threads were turned over between John O'Keefe and him and between Karen Read and him. He knew that there were some text messages between Brian Higgins and Karen Read that were romantic. Alan Jackson gets into the fact that Brian Higgins had the means to commit this crime. We then see some more text messages. We hear them. We don't see any of them really ever. But between Officer DeCecco, he's the evidence officer at Mass State Police, and between Michael Proctor. So the medical examiner concluded that John O'Keefe's death was undetermined. And DeCecco said, you should have had me go talk to her. And Michael Proctor is like, I had 2 conference calls with her. I laid out all the evidence and she still came up undetermined. Michael Proctor actually wrote, of course it's undetermined. She's a whack job. In the Jen McCabe text messages that were extracted from the phone, he says he doesn't see on the Celebrate extraction the deleted text messages and phone calls, says he was unaware that they were deleted. And then we start getting into Kevin Albert and his relationship with Kevin. Apparently they worked on a cold case in Cape Cod together, July of 2022. He knew that Kevin Albert was the main reason of the recusal from the Canton Police Department. There are still a lot of text messages between him and Kevin Albert asking him to coordinate conference rooms inside Canton PD to do investigation and to do interviews with some of the key witnesses. Alan Jackson kind of catches them in a lie because earlier in the day, he says that he only really knew Colin Albert, Chris Albert, and Julie Albert, but he actually really does know Kevin Albert. They work together quite a bit. When they were down the Cape together working on this cold case, him and Kevin Albert end up going out drinking afterwards, and they get so drunk that Kevin Albert actually leaves his badge in Michael Proctor's car and his gun. We do see some of the text messages between them to establish that they were both drunk. Kevin Albert says that he was hungover, and there's a really weird exchange where he says that to get the badge and the gun back, he would just leave them in his mailbox. I'll get to that in the next video too. It's already been established that there was no physical evidence log until March 14th when all of the clothing went to the lab. He took control of the taillight pieces on January 29th. We start going over some of the surveillance video, and Jackson lists off all of the video footage that was turned over to the defense in June 2022. The Sallyport video that's inverted was never turned over. This is a brand new video. He says that he had seen it though, and it kind of gives the illusion that he had manipulated the video, but nothing really comes to light on that. Let's go to part 2.